Welcome to part 13 of this tutorial on Excel VBA user forms. This video is about image controls, so it's all about displaying pictures on your forms while the forms are running. We'll start by explaining how to draw an image control and then how to load a picture into it using the load picture method. We'll explain a few of the common errors that are likely to occur when you do this, for instance choosing a file that's not an image file or entering a file path for a file that doesn't exist, and we'll explain how to write some error handling code to get around those problems. We'll explain the 3 different picture size modes and show you how you can give your users the choice about which size mode they use when the forms are running. And then towards the end of the video we'll create a nice system that lets the user use a file picker dialog box to select an image file rather than having to enter a file path manually. So there's quite a lot to do. Let's get started. Okay, so here's the basic image controls example. What this lets the user do is enter a path to an image file related to the film they're trying to add to our list. I've got it set up so that they can click on this little ellipsis button to browse for a picture, and I've got a few sample images here related to some films. If you haven't got these, don't worry, you can always just use the default Windows sample pictures, so you can always browse for those. These will work as well. And you can double click on an image to insert it into the image control. We've got a few different tools going on here, so we can change the picture size mode, so we can switch between stretched and clipped and zoomed. And we've got a little bit of validation, so that if the user types in an invalid file path, that will prevent the user from continuing. Everything will update again when they choose a related image. The actual image itself doesn't get stored in the worksheet. All that gets stored is the path to the image. So when I click the Add to List button with everything filled in, all that will do is add in the path to that image file. So that's our example. Let's get started creating it. We're going to need to do a fair bit of rearranging on the form to make room for the image, so let's start by reducing the size of our currency exchange frame. Then I'm going to increase the size of the form so that I can move that entire frame and all of its controls to another little section. So let's just drop that just down below the film genre section. Okay, next thing to do is draw another frame into which we can draw our picture. So I'm going to increase the width of my form a little bit as well, and let's draw a frame in that big section there, that big blank section that we can use to store our picture. I'm going to make the frame quite tall because we're going to add a fair few different controls here eventually, but once I've drawn the frame, let's just make sure it's the same height as the rest, just about, almost. There we go. And then what we're going to do is rename it and change its caption. So the name of this frame is going to be called Film Picture Frame. No pun intended. And then we'll just call it picture. We'll give it a caption of picture. I'll spell that properly as well. Then what we can also do is draw a couple of controls inside that frame. Still haven't got the size quite right. Sorry to be so fussy about this, but there we go. Next thing to do is draw a text box that's going to hold the path to the file containing the image. So let's draw a text box in there. I won't bother giving this a caption. I'm just going to draw it straight into the frame and then make it relatively wide. Let's fill the width of the frame. And I'm going to change its name so it's called Film Picture Path. So obviously we've drawn frames and text boxes previously. What we haven't drawn yet is an image control. So if I click back into the form, the image control is represented by this little tool here. So I'm going to click on that tool and then click and drag somewhere inside the frame to draw that control. Not quite filling up the entire height of the frame. I want to leave a little bit of room for some extra controls a little bit later on. And then all we're going to do is rename this so that it's called Film Picture. Okay, so that's all the controls drawn for the time being. What we can do now is get on with how we set the picture that appears in the image control when a user types in a path into this text box. We'll use the before update event of the text box to control what picture appears in the image control. The main reason we're using the before update event is to make it easier to validate this text box later on. So let's double click the text box to give us the default event handler for that one, which is the change event, which isn't quite what we want. So we can use the drop down list at the top right hand corner and choose before update. And then we can just delete the change event. We shan't be needing that. Now the code we're going to add is actually quite straightforward. I'm going to add a single line of code that says film picture dot picture. So the picture property is the property that controls what image gets displayed in the image control. I can't just set this to be equal to the path of the image file. It can't just be a string of text. What I have to do instead is use the load picture method, which will actually pass back a reference to the image itself. But into the load picture method, I can pass the path of the file that I want to load. And the path of the file that I want to load is going to be stored in my film picture path .value property. So, having done that, I can simply go back to Excel, and then I can show the form on screen, and as long as I type in a valid file path, then my picture should appear as soon as I try to navigate away from this control. Just to show you which images I've got available, as I mentioned earlier on, I've collected a bunch of film pictures and I've stored them in a folder called Film Pics in the root of my C drive. If you don't have any, don't worry, you can always just use the default sample pictures that are installed along with Windows. I'm going to use one of my Film Pics. So I need to copy the path first of all, just to avoid having to type it in, and then I need to tag on the name of a specific file. So if I type in a file name, including its extension, and then just hit tab or click onto another part of the dialog box, just navigate away from this control, it should display that image in the image control. If I were to enter a different image file instead, so let's go for Titanic this time, and then hit tab to navigate away, then again it will change the image that's displayed. So that part's all working nice and straightforwardly. What we also need to make sure we've done though is make sure that if a user's entered a file name that doesn't exist, that the image file doesn't just do this. If I try to type in a file name that doesn't exist, everything falls over. So it's a fairly obvious error message, file not found. If I hit the debug button, it's a fairly obvious line of code that's going to fail. So we need to make sure we've handled that particular problem. I think the simplest way to solve this problem is to add a basic bit of error handling code. Now we've created an entire video all about error handling in VBA as part of the main Excel VBA tutorial series, so I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail here. Please do refer to that video if you need a bit of background information on how error handling works. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to write an on error statement immediately above the line that tries to load the picture, and I'm going to say that if anything goes wrong after this point, go to an error handling label called, I'm going to call it pic prob, as in short for picture problem. What I can then do is create that little label a little bit further down in the procedure. So I'm going to type in pic prob down here, and then I'm going to add a colon after its name to create a label. I want to make sure that I don't run into the error handling code should everything go correctly, so I'm going to write an exit sub statement just below where I've successfully loaded the picture. And then in the pic prob error handler, what I'm going to do is say film picture dot picture equals load picture, open parentheses, and then in a set of double quotes I'm going to enter nothing. So I'm going to pass in an empty string. So what that will do is if there's a picture that's already loaded into the image control, it will clear out any picture, so it will go blank again, just to avoid potentially confusing the user, showing an image that's not actually related to the file path they've entered. I'm also going to make sure that I've changed the background colour of the film picture path text box. So I'm going to say film picture path dot back color equals RGB pink, which is the same color we've been using for all of our other standard validation controls. And then I'm also going to make sure that I've cancelled this event, so the user can't move away from that text box until they've entered a valid path. So I'm going to say cancel equals true. Just to make sure that when the user does enter a valid path later on, that the background colour of the text box goes back to being white, I'm going to add a bit of code to the after update event. So the after update event now will only be triggered for this text box if the before update event has succeeded. When we cancel the before update event, it then prevents execution of the after update. So all I'm going to do in here is say film picture path dot back colour equals RGB white. And having added that simple little bit of code now, we can go away and check that this works. So back into Excel, and if I show the form on screen, I should be able to, first of all, let's enter a film path that does exist, or a picture path that does exist. So I can say C : film pics / avatar.jpg, and then if I tap away from that control, that appears. If I get that wrong, this time all that happens is rather than a runtime error, I get the picture box empty again, so it goes back to a blank box, and the background colour goes pink for the text box. If I reset that so that it's a valid file path again and try to tab away from it, everything goes back to normal. So there's that problem solved. The next thing to talk about is how to control the size of the image. You may be able to tell from this image that I've got loaded here that a lot of the picture has been cropped off. So what we want to be able to do is change this so that I can see the entire image. So I'm going to close down the form, and then just to do this manually first of all, if I head back to the Visual Basic Editor, if I select the image control, in the Properties window there's a Picture Size Mode property, and the default property here is set to Clip. So it'll chop off any bits of the image that it can't display. If I change this, there's two other properties. There's Stretch and there's Zoom. So Stretch will make the image fill up the entire frame, even if it means distorting the image in one direction or the other. If I choose Zoom, however, which is the option I'm going to choose now, and then run the form again, and this time I'm going to type in, well, I'll type in the same path. I should have just copied and pasted this, shouldn't I? Filmpics, and then a backslash, and then say avatar.jpg. And then as soon as I tap away from the control, now I can see the entire image. So you can see it's the dimensions of the box aren't quite proportional, so I've got a little bit of grey background there, but at least I can see the entire image. It might actually be nicer to allow the user to control how the image is displayed, so there are 3 different picture size modes. As we saw in a little preview at the start of the video, I could choose to display little option buttons that let the user choose which picture size mode to use. So let's have a go at doing that. I'm going to close the form down, and then we'll add in some extra controls to this frame. Now hopefully you've watched the video from earlier in the series where we've dealt with option buttons, so we don't need to go into a huge amount of detail now about how they work. Let's start by drawing one on the form just below the picture frame, or in fact below the picture image control rather than the picture frame, and I'm going to change this one's name so it's called Film Picture Zoom. And then I'll change its caption so that that simply says Zoom. Change its width somewhat, and then we can draw another option button, and I'm going to call this one Film Picture Clip. So Film Picture Clip, and then I'll change its caption so that one's called Clip, and again change its width, and then we'll add in one further option button which I'm going to call Film Picture Stretch. So we can call this one Film Picture Stretch. I just want to make sure, oh sorry, I need to change its caption as well, so I'll call this one Stretch. I could make sure that they're all the same sort of, aligned properly. I do get slightly fussy about stuff like this, and make sure there's no white space between them. That looks reasonably well, neatly laid out. So one of the things I'm going to do is not actually necessary in this case because they're all part of a frame anyway, so they're all part of the same option group. But just to make absolutely certain of that, what I'd like to do is assign a group name to these 3 option buttons. So having selected them, I'm going to go to the group name property, and I'm going to call this one Film Picture Size. So that's the name of the group. That just makes sure that they're all controlled together so that only one of these 3 options can be selected at once. The next thing to do is add code so that when one of these option buttons is selected, it changes the size mode of the image. So this isn't particularly sophisticated. All we're going to do is use the change event of each of these 3 option buttons to determine which size mode to apply. So let's start with the zoom option button. If I double click on that one first, it will give me the click event of that option button. I actually want the change event for this one, so I'm going to use the drop down list at the top right to choose change and then get rid of the click event. Now because this is going to be done in 3 different procedures, it makes sense to write a separate subroutine for this. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say private sub change picture size. And then in here, all we're going to do is use a simple if statement. So I'm going to say if film picture zoom, film picture zoom dot value. So this is a Boolean property, so I could say film picture zoom dot value equals true, but it's absolutely not necessary to say the equals true part. So I can just say if film picture zoom dot value, then all I'm going to do here is say film picture dot picture size mode equals, and then choose one of the 3 options. It makes sense, of course, here to choose the zoom option. And then I can have an else if statement. So it's essentially the same basic structure for each one of these. So I can say film picture zoom rather than film picture zoom, I can say film picture clip dot value. Then I want to set its size mode to be equal to film picture size mode clip. And then one last one, I can just copy and paste that one more time. This is the only other available option, so I could just have an else here rather than an else if. But just in case later on I add in some extra options, I'm going to say film picture stretch, and then make sure that the size mode is indeed equal to size mode stretch, and then end if. So I can then simply call that procedure from the change event handler of film picture zoom. So I can say call. I don't need the call keyword. You may remember from previous videos this is optional, but I tend to put it in just to indicate that I am calling a procedure I've written rather than just a method that already exists in VBA. So change picture size, and then I can, while I'm here, choose the other two option buttons. So I've done the zoom one, I've got the stretch one here, and that gives me the click event, whereas I want the change event. So let's select that and delete the click event. And then I just need to call the same procedure. So I'm going to copy and paste that line of code. And then one more time, let's find the film picture clip option button. And again, just paste in the exact same call to the same procedure. Okay, so having done all of that now, if I switch back into Excel, I should be able to show the form on screen. And again, I'll type in a quick file path. I'll go for avatar again, .jpg, and then tab to move away from that control. So we should see that it's set to zoom by default, which is the size mode that I chose earlier on. But if I click on any of these other two option buttons, it will then change the size mode automatically. What would also be quite nice would be when the form first loads, for it to have the zoom option selected. You may have noticed before I clicked on the zoom option it wasn't selected, none of these three options were selected. So what we're going to do is just very quickly close the form down and then go back to the Visual Basic editor. And then I'm going to go to the initialize event of the form. So I'm going to double click the background of the form, and then just down towards the bottom here where I've set up all the various default options already, I'm going to say film picture zoom dot value equals true. So I'm going to assign a true value to that option button by default. So one more time, back into Excel. This time when I launch the form, it's already got the zoom mode selected. In the introduction to this video, I showed you that there was a nice little button we could click on to let the user select the file path. That's slightly trickier to achieve than it really should be, but let me give you the basics of how it works. First of all, I'm going to close the form down and head back to the Visual Basic editor. We need to start by changing a couple of properties of this text box. The really annoying thing about this is that the properties I want to change aren't actually displayed in the properties window. At least they're not for a text box. Bizarrely, they're available for a combo box. If I just show you what I mean by that, if I select the combo box we added in a previous video, there are properties to do with the drop button style. So you can see here there's a drop button style. If I just widen this properties window, there's an arrow style and a plane and an ellipsis and a reduce. We're going to go with the ellipsis style for our text box, but sadly I can't choose the drop button style for a text box. That property is not available. There's also a property related to a combo box to do with when the drop button is displayed. So it says show drop button when, and that's set to always display it rather than when it's activated or when it's focused or never. So a text box should have the same property, but it's not actually available in the properties window. So the only way we can change these properties for a text box is in code. So we're going to add a little bit more code to the initialize event of the form by double clicking on the form's background and then adding in a couple of extra lines of code to the initialize procedure. Now we only need 2 lines of code to make this work, but the other irritating thing is that we don't get any help via the IntelliSense. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say film picture path dot, and the first property I want to change is what drop button style I use. But you'll see if I say drop button style, this doesn't appear in the IntelliSense. Annoyingly, when I type in an equals sign, I do get the enumerated list of constants, so I can choose this specific style. So this gives me a bit of help, but it appears as though that drop button style isn't available for a text box. This will actually work. Again, same thing then for film picture path dot show drop button when equals, and again I get the enumerated list of constants that allow me to indicate that this property does exist, but it doesn't appear in the IntelliSense for a text box. So I'm going to choose show drop button when always. So having chosen those two options or set those two properties when the form is initialized, if I just go back to Excel now and then show the form on screen, I'll find that I've now got a nice little ellipsis that I can click on to do something useful. Of course it won't actually do anything yet. I've got to add the code to make this work. So that's the next step. The first thing we have to do is choose which event we attach this code to. That's actually a much easier choice than you might expect. If I close down the form and then head back to the Visual Basic editor, and then I'm going to double click on the text box to get into the code view, we've seen the after and before update events from earlier on. The event we're going to choose here is called drop button click. So really weirdly, a text box has got this drop button click event, even though it does everything in its power to hide from you the fact that you can add a drop button to a text box. Really bizarre. Anyway, drop button click, that's the event we're going to go for. So all we need to do is add some code into this procedure so that when we click on the drop button, it displays a dialog box allowing us to pick a file. So we're going to use a file dialog box to do this, and again, as part of the main Excel VBA tutorial series, we created an entire video that explained how file dialogs worked. So again, we're not going to go into a huge amount of detail here, just enough to give you the basics, and if you need reference to some of the more complex, advanced things, there's an entire video about that in the other tutorial series. Let's start by saying dim fd as a file dialog, and then I'm going to set fd to be equal to application.file dialog, then open some parentheses, and the type we're going to go for here is a file picker. There are a few properties of this dialog box I want to set, so I'm first of all going to make sure that I'm only going to allow the user to select a single file rather than multiple ones. I'm going to say fd.allow_multiselect equals false. I'm going to change the title of the dialog box, so it says fd.title equals choose image. That's just a cosmetic change, that will do nothing really. And another cosmetic change will be the button name, so I'm going to say fd.buttonname equals select this image. The other main thing I would like to do is point the user to a specific folder to begin with. So when the dialog box first launches, it's already pointing to a specific path. So I'm going to say fd.initialFilename, which is a slightly unusual name for the property, but this actually set the default folder that it's pointed to as well as the default file. So I'm going to say initial file name equals then c:\filmpics. So that will avoid me having to type it in multiple times. The last couple of basic things I need to do are to display the file dialog on screen, so I can say fd.show to make that work, and then I want to pass in the path of the file that I've selected into the value property of this text box. So once I've clicked the button on the file dialog file picker, I can say film picture path dot value equals. Then I need to refer to the selected item in the file dialog. So I can say fd.selectedItems. This is actually an array of items. It's a one-based array, so I need to refer to the first item that I've selected. I've only allowed one single item to be selected anyway, but if I have the allow multi-select, there are multiple items I could select. That's what we call selected items rather than item. So the basics of this will now work. There's a little bit of work to do to get it to work perfectly, but just to show you the basics, if I go back to Excel, show the form on screen, and then click the little ellipsis button, here's my file dialog pointing to the film pics folder by default, so I can click on the image that I want and then select this image, and then I've got to of course make sure that if I tab away from that control, it will update to display the image. Okay, so that's the basics working, but there's a few tweaks we need to make to this to get it to be working perfectly. First of all, an easy change to make. It's slightly annoying that when I've selected an image from the dialog box and clicked to select this image, it doesn't update automatically. I have to tab away from the text box in order to make that update. So the simplest way to make this work is if I just close the form down and then head back to the Visual Basic Editor and go back to the code behind the text box. I mean, I could write a line of code again that changes the picture property of the picture or the image control, but the simplest thing by far to do, because I've already added all of that code to the before and after update events of the text box, all I really need to do is trigger the update event. So I can make that work just by setting the focus to any other control on the form. So perhaps a simple thing to do would be to say add to list, that's the name of the button, the default button on the form, add to list.setFocus. So if I do that, that will trigger the update of that text box. So again, just heading back to Excel, showing the form on screen, and then selecting a file, click select this image, and as soon as I do that this time, the focus gets set to the add to list button, but that will trigger the update of the image. The next problem to solve is what happens if I display the form on screen but then either close it down or click cancel without having selected an image. If I do either of those two things, what happens is I get a runtime error, and that happens because I'm trying to refer to a selected item when there are no selected items in the dialog box. So I'm going to reset the procedure at that point with the reset button and then get back to the code behind my text box. So we need to add in a quick extra line of code that will check that something has been selected. To make this work, I've got to be able to detect which of the buttons I clicked on the file dialog box, and in order to make that work, I'm going to declare a variable which I'm going to call result as integer. Now the result of a dialog box isn't just what items you've selected. The result is the actual button that I've clicked, and I can retrieve that by setting result to be equal to the show method of the dialog box. So when the dialog box is finally closed down by clicking one of its buttons, it returns a value to the result variable. Now the variable result will be either 0 if I've clicked the cancel button or close it down with a cross, or it'll be -1 if I've clicked the action button, the one that selects the file. So a really simplistic thing to do here would be to say if the result was 0, if result equals 0, then simply exit the subroutine, so don't do anything. So that won't do anything to change the existing file path of the image, so it'll just be as though nothing had happened at all. So having done that, if I go back to Excel and launch the form, and I'll select an image properly the first time round, and then if I click on the ellipsis again, and this time I choose cancel, nothing happens. If I show it and click the cross, nothing happens. If I run it again and select a different image, then it shows that image. So that's that problem solved. Another potential problem I've got with my file picker dialog box is that currently there's no restriction as to what type of file I can select. It just happens that at the moment I'm pointing to a folder that only contains JPEG files. If I pointed to a folder, let's say the desktop for instance, and picked a non-image file, let's go with an Excel file, an XLSM file. If I choose to select this image, which clearly it isn't an image at this point, the whole thing falls over. If I just click debug, the reason this has fallen over is because I'm trying to set the focus to the add to list button. But I can't set the focus to the add to list button because what's happened at this point is it's triggered the validation code in the film picture path before update event, so it's cancelling out of that procedure. So that means it can't trigger the after update event, which means it can't escape from that text box, so it can't set the focus to any other control. So, what's the simplest thing to do here? The simplest thing is to make sure that I can't select anything other than image files from this file picker dialog box. So I'm going to stop the code from running with the reset button and then head back to the code behind the film picture drop button click procedure. We can add a couple of lines of code then to set the filters of the dialog box when it appears. So I'm going to give myself a couple of blank lines just below where I've set the basic properties of the dialog box, and then first of all I'm going to say fd.filters.clear. So that will remove any existing filters from the dialog box, the default one being the all files filter, so that will now be gone. What I can then do is say fd.filters.add, and I've got two parameters to fill in here, the description and extensions. So the description is completely free text. I can type in here whatever I like, but I think it makes sense to say something like image files. The extensions must be valid file extensions. So what I'm going to do here is enter, let's say, I'll have 3 I think. I'm going to say *.bmp for bitmaps, then a semicolon, and then I'm going to say *.gif or GIF. I've read recently that it was meant to be pronounced GIF rather than GIF, which I find really odd, as the G stands for graphics, which is a hard G. But anyway, that's just me. So we'll go with GIF or GIF, whatever you want to say, then a semicolon and *.jpg. That's not the full range of file types you can use in an image control on a form. Just to very, very quickly show you from the MSDN reference page, I can use bitmaps, I think for cursors, GIFs, ICO for icons, JPEGs, and WMF. Is that Windows Media File, I think? Anyway, those are the other valid options. We're just sticking to these 3, so bitmaps, GIFs, and JPEGs. So, having done that now, if I switch back to the Visual Basic Editor, and in fact, if I switch back to Excel and show the form on screen, I should find now that when I launch the dialog box, it's filtered for just bitmaps, GIFs, and JPEGs. So if I try to browse to another folder, such as my desktop, even if there are other files in there, such as there were 2 Excel files and there was a text file, those aren't displayed now because they're filtered for just these file types. So that's the easiest way, I think, to control what file types the user can select. The final and very basic thing that we have to do now is make sure that when we click the Add to List button, whatever file path we've entered into the picture box gets added to the worksheet. So let's close the form down and back to the Visual Basic Editor again, and we'll go back to the code behind the Add to List button, and I want to right click on Add Data to List and then choose to view its definition, just to get back to that procedure. And then right down at the bottom of the list now, where we've added in all of the other units of information, we're going to say active cell.offset 0,9 .value equals film picture path dot value. Simple as that. So now that the whole thing is complete, let's go back to Excel and let's just give it a quick test. If we launch the form, and we'll enter in some proper details I think this time. So we'll enter in some proper numbers and a proper date, and then we'll make sure we've selected a certificate and the runtime, and then make sure we've specified whether we've seen it or not. Check a couple of boxes for the film genre, and then let's select the picture for the film as well. So click the little ellipsis button, choose the appropriate image, or inappropriate image as that might be, and then finally click the Add to List button, and we should find that everything now gets added in to the list just as we'd expect. So there we go, there's your quick introduction to image controls on forms. Hope you found that one a bit more fun. Join us for the next one, which is going to be about multi-page controls. If you like what you've seen here, why not head over to the WiseOwl website, where you can find loads more free resources, including these videos, some written blogs and tutorials, and even some exercises that you can download to practice your skills. Thanks for watching, see you next time.